realize there was a treatment for this condition, or I didn't realize this was serious. I'll go in and have my doctor check me out. And so what we're finding is that there's a great educational component to these advertisements, and that the net effect of that is that people, especially people who aren't so well off, who might not, read anything medically related or investigate things like supplements and things on their own, when they hear it on television, which is their medium of education, say, oh, okay, I'll look into this, and they go to their doctor, and then they find out they have high blood pressure, diabetes, or that some condition that they had was caused by these. So it's actually having a net positive effect on health because people are discovering things that they can do something about, whereas before they had no knowledge. So that seems to be the predominant effect, which is very nice because I believe that liberty works, and here it is, it does. Drug companies advertise. There are other problems, as you mentioned, with the supplements. Does that push out the supplements? But the reason the supplements are having a problem is because they have a limited playing field. They can't, let's talk about the fish oil example. Perfect example. Those of you who follow nutrition know that fish oil is just about a miracle. And it's been touted for a lot of different things, and it's really, really great. I had a friend who may be the only woman to have survived idiopathic pulmonary, not obstruction, what's the other one? Fibrosis, thank you. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. She might be the only survivor of that. What we did, because it's so, the syndrome looks a lot like liver disease. I know that, a clinician can understand this maybe, but anyhow, I started her on fish oil and some other nutrients, and she's okay. The only cure for this normally is transplant. She was on the transplant list. You have usually 2 years after diagnosis to live. 5 years later, she's got a personal trainer working out all the time. It's great. Okay, fish oil is great. That's what I'm trying to get across. Now, it's so great that one drug company said, I think we're going to spend all that money jumping through the FDA hoops. And they did. So you can get prescription fish oil. Believe it or not. Of course, your copay is the same amount of money that you would pay if you went to the drugstore and bought pharmaceutical grade fish oil. I know because my sister tried to do it because she's one of the people that needs it. So it's very interesting that the drug reps can go to the doctors of this company and say, our fish oil is the only fish oil that has been proven and approved by the FDA for all this stuff. So this is what you should give your patients. But you see, a regular fish oil manufacturer, pharmaceutical grade fish oil, should be able to do the same thing, but they can't. It's against the law. So that's where the rubber meets the road on that one. And that's why these regulations, which are what lets the FDA do that, are so destructive. So if you want fish oil and you're willing to pay the prescription price for it and your doctor prescribes it, then you can get it, but it will cost the whole system much more than if you could just buy it over the counter. So our healthcare costs go up. It doesn't matter who pays. This is the point you need to make to people who want universal healthcare. It doesn't matter who pays. As long as the healthcare costs are high, there's going to be healthcare rationing, just like we talked about here. That's the only way the system can work. You've got to bring the healthcare costs down, and trying to mandate decreases won't work. The only way you can do it is get rid of the waste, and the waste is in the regulation. Yes?
Do you find that the pharmaceutical companies will withdraw a working drug at the end of its patent life cycle to put in a new drug to replace that one?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. That's one of the reasons that our drugs are less safe. Basically what he asked was, will the drug companies put in a new drug to replace one that's off patent? And the answer is yes, in a way. They also have their own generic of their own drug. But what they will do is they will develop, because now they have another dilemma. The generic companies are going to compete. The only way they can get rid of that competition is to patent a different type of drug, maybe slightly different, develop it all over again. Now the thing is, they don't know anything about the side effects of this new drug. So instead of using an older drug where we know the side effects, so we know what to be careful with, we start with a new drug where the safety effects are not known, where there's a higher risk that will do something that we don't realize until it's too late. So this is one reason why drugs are less safe today, is because even if all the drug did was work for another indication, another disease for which it wasn't originally approved for, it's usually cheaper to develop a whole, or it makes more economic sense, I should say. It's not cheaper. It makes more economic sense to start a whole new drug program with a whole new drug rather than use the old one and get an approval for the other disease. Why? Because the patent will run out by the time they get approval for that other disease. So they've got to start all over again so they can have the monopoly protection so they might be able to recover the development costs. Now, I know this sounds kind of convoluted, and it is. There's a reason it sounds convoluted. It is. It's crazy. It's crazy. And once you start understanding how these regulations work against you and drive up healthcare costs, not just in pharmaceuticals, but every other one, then you realize what the problem with healthcare is. And then when people come to you and say, well, we need universal healthcare, you know what to tell them. Universal healthcare means healthcare rationing. There's only one way that we can all get the healthcare we need. And that is to make sure that we have the freedom to get innovation, inexpensive supplements when that's the right answer, breakthrough drugs when it's not. And the only way we're going to do this and keep costs down is get rid of the waste. And all the waste, well, maybe not all of it, but almost all the waste is in the regulatory system.
And assumes, just for the sake of argument, that it was possible to repeal these amendments that increase the development costs. If you didn't patent a drug, wouldn't the health insurers insist that patients use the generic as soon as they were legally allowed to do so?
Okay, the question was, if you didn't have patents, if you got rid of these amendments, and wouldn't insurance companies insist that you use the generic as soon as possible? Well, the answer to that is there really wouldn't be a difference between generic and patented, for the most part. Because if you're not patenting the drug, you're just getting it to market, then in essence, it is a generic drug. But what keeps the drug company profiting in that situation is the fact that they were first to market and have brand name. Now that used to be really, really important, and the reason is that not all companies have the same quality. So what would happen is companies would actually advertise that our anti-serum or whatever, our serum has never had this type of reaction, some common side effect or something, or our medicine doesn't have this problem. We have a record of safety, and this is how they were advertised. And people who use brand names, actually did that because they felt it was worth paying a few cents more and getting that safety factor. That was part of how the market protected people. And also, of course, there were other third-party evaluations. One thing I wanted to share with you that you might not be aware of is that the FDA doesn't do any drug testing. No, not one. The drug company does the drug testing, they write up the results, and then they send literally a truckload or two of paper to the FDA. The FDA reads the paper, and if they think everything looks on the up and up, then they approve the drug. But the company does its own testing. There isn't any third-party testing. So the FDA isn't testing drugs. That's an important thing for you to be aware of. And that's why there's been some drug scandals, because you can imagine with all this monetary pressure that sometimes things aren't put quite the way they could be. Now, I have to tell you, it is actually hard to do that because the process, information goes through so many hands before it gets to the FDA. You would think at some point it would get caught, and it would most usually do that. But if you really had a concerted effort to mask something, it's possible to do it. Whereas if you have third-party testing, you wouldn't have that problem either. Any other